A second thought then is that we have to prepare an aggressive fight back based on an alternative narrative. And that's what we've been talking about since last night, but particularly we had brilliant idea after brilliant idea today. It's essential that we not be reactionary, that we not only be defending what we have, but being articulate in putting out what we want. Our health care is sustainable. We have to correct and challenge that notion. Public health care costs have stayed steady as a percentage of GDP. It's the private services and the drug costs that have gone through the roof. And nor is it true that the graying of Canada is going to break the bank. Statistics gathered by the Canadian Institute for Health Information shows that the predicted increases in cost as the baby boomers hit old age is lower than the average growth in per capita over the next 2 decades. It is simply not true. And even if it is going to cost more, what kind of a society would not want to take care of seniors who've given so much for so many years? So we need our universal comprehensive health care system from cradle to grave. We have a right to it, and we have to fight for a narrative. And I would offer some principles upon which I think we can fight. The first is that the profit motive must be removed entirely from our health care system. Profit is not the cure for what ails Medicare. As we know, Americans spend twice as much on health care per capita because they have to pay through their taxes and then through user fees and direct billing and so on. The profit motive has no place in our health care system. When health care is treated as a public service, it can be delivered well at low cost. When it is treated as a business, it has to squeeze profit all the way down the line. The federal government has to enforce the 5 principles of the Canada Health Act and end user fees, extra billing, and private clinics. I would also argue, as another principle, that we say that public health care must be extended, and everybody today has said this, to include full continuum of care of all the services. Medicare's original compromise of ensuring only doctors and hospitals has meant that the most expensive parts of our healthcare system have ballooned, while other, less expensive and more efficient models have shrunk. Tommy Douglas always saw insurance coverage as only the first step toward a true public system. He never saw it as the end. We need to break the patent monopoly of the drug companies. Everyone today has said that. We know a national public drug plan would save taxpayers billions because governments could buy in bulk. And we need full public coverage for home care, long-term care, community care, and dental care. And we must set our sights very high. The third demand is that the federal government must recommit as a federal government to public health care. When public health care was introduced in 1966, it was assumed, or at least talked about, that the federal government would put in half of the funding. I don't think that ever happened. I think the highest ever was about 40%. But successive governments have cut it so much that it now stands at a low of 20%. And successive governments have also stood by, while some provinces, now many, have allowed the proliferation of private services in violation of the Canada Health Act. We need a full commitment from the federal government to assume its historic responsibility in setting national standards that guarantee universal, comprehensive coverage to all Canadians. Again, I think we need to state these very clearly and set the bar high. Fourthly, trade agreements must not be allowed to dictate public health care policy. The Harper government is exposing our public health care to market discipline under free trade agreements. Under international trade rules, Canada is obliged to reciprocate when other countries open their markets to Canadian pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, medical technology, and home care services, and so on. The latest struggle, and this is why I say we have to enlarge this fight, is around this CETA, the Canada-European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. It is the biggest trade agreement ever because it is now going to apply to subnational governments. That is everything that provinces and municipalities spend their money on: schools, hospitals, roads, water systems, and so on. And we have not building in safeguards in the provincial exemptions that we have seen at all adequately for our public services. Most at risk are drug costs, because the Europeans are absolutely insistent that one of the conditions of their signing the CETA is that we will move to the drug patent regime of the Europeans, which would cost, and everyone agrees, about $3 billion more a year for Canadians. We're talking the opposite of a national pharmacare program, and would make it almost impossible for any future government to ever even consider a national pharmacare program once we have moved our trade regime into an agreement where the corporations, the big drug companies, would have the right to sue under an investor-state agreement, to sue for compensation if a future government tried to change its mind. And the last of the principles I think we need to put out very clearly is that we need to call for and implement a fair taxation system again to pay for this. And we all know in this room that if we do it well, a lot of this is going to pay for itself. When we move to the kind of community and long-term care that we envisage, the brilliant work that we heard here today, we know that we're going to save money from many, many, many places. But we also know that cuts to federal and provincial taxes have removed well over $200 billion from public sector revenues over the past 15 years. And we now have among the lowest corporate tax rates in the industrialized world. What does it say about our values when we choose to bail out our corporations and banks, but let our most vulnerable citizens fend for themselves? Why is it okay to protect banks and corporations in trade agreements, but not the health care of our citizens? Every generation has to fight for Medicare. We owe it to those who came before us, and we owe it to those who will come after us, not to let it go on our watch. Healthcare is a fundamental right and a public good for which no financial barriers must be erected. Canadians have fought for this right, and it cannot be taken over or taken away by the ideological whim of a man and his team who got into power by the votes of only 25% of us. And if you remember, if you count who didn't vote for them and who didn't vote at all, only 25% of Canadians voted for Stephen Harper. The vast majority of us share different values, and we have to stand up and assert ourselves. And I don't know if you know, but the government today announced that it's backtracking on C-30, the surveillance bill, because there was such a public outcry. If we can get them to backtrack on the surveillance bill, we can get them to backtrack on their abandonment of our healthcare system. And we watch this heat up for the next election. This will be the heart of the next election. So my third and final thought to leave you with today is this. We need to remember the struggle of those who came before us and fought for health care, fought so hard so that we would have the benefits of this wonderful system, and what they gave up, and realize that we owe them something as much as we owe the future. We need to take heart and remember the original fight for Medicare, which was ferocious. People lost their homes, people lost their farms to pay for health care. Do you know that half the young men called up for service in 1939 were rejected from military service because of poor health? There's a wonderful book many of you have, I'm sure, called Life Before Medicare, and I just want to pull out a couple of those stories for us to think about. One remembers a young mother dying on the steps of a hospital in Grand Prairie while her husband was inside, begging them to take her in. Another remembers a young Ontario mother who had to sell her 2 cows to pay for the hospital for her dead baby before the hospital would release the child's body. Oh. A Manitoba senior recalls a neighboring farm woman who was diagnosed with cancer. She knew that in order to get treatment in a hospital, her family would have to sell the farm, so she decided to die at home. What she did was every day when her husband went out to work in the field, she had him close up all the windows so the neighbors would not hear her cries of pain, and lock the doors from the outside to stop her from running for help. Her suffering lasted 2 months, but she saved the family farm. This was a decision she made. When Tommy Douglas decided to bring in public insurance in Saskatchewan, he faced the private insurance company, or industry, the Canadian Medical Association, the American Medical Association, and the Saskatchewan College of Physicians and Surgeons, who went on strike. That's how ferociously they fought the notion of public health care. To meet the healthcare needs of the people, a coalition of farmers, unions, and healthcare workers set up 27 healthcare cooperatives that still exist to this day. And they brought in doctors from Great Britain, including 2 women doctors, 2 of the early women doctors. One was Dr. Joan Whitney, and the other was Dr. Margaret Mahood. And they tell the story of how they used to have to be escorted to work because they received regular death threats. This strike was reported all over the world. I mean, it was a famous, famous strike when Tommy Douglas stood up to the entire establishment. Of Tommy Douglas, the Vancouver Sun said, "This man, Tommy Douglas, is, well, a good deed in a naughty world. He is a breath of clear prairie air in a stifling climate of payola and chicanery and double talk and pretense." Well, I say here today, let's bring some clear Alberta prairie air to this struggle and tell our governments that the Canadian people fought long and hard for our public health care system, and we are not about to give it up. Let us vow today to stand on guard for it, lest it be destroyed by stealth and lost in a myriad of betrayals. We owe this to those who came before us and fought so hard for Medicare, and we owe it to those who come after us. It will take the rest of our lives to fight for this, but then what else have we got to do? Thank you very much.